We don't hit home runs on this podcast. We work station to station. I'm back with my battery mate, as always, Dustin. And Rob, the righty from the pen, is in to discuss the offseason. We're going to give a little bit of a report card towards the end. But Dustin, I have a brief quote here from John Schneider from today. I think we are better on paper. Do you agree? And maybe give me some thoughts on recent Blue Jays offseason. The Jays have started spring training as of today. Well, sorry, pitchers and catchers have reported full workouts start next week. And that goes along with another deadline. But tell me just little bit about your thoughts on the offseason.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously today's the day that pitchers and catchers report, as you mentioned. And, you know, it's always that those few moments in the winter where you start feeling like, okay, it's back, it's coming. You're watching, you know, Keegan Matheson's cell phone videos of Max Scherzer, and it's exciting time. So I'm a little bit optimistic. You know, everybody's the same level of hopefulness, I would assume, at least those of us that aren't, you know, completely bitter and rotten from the last few years of disappointment. But with regards to Schneider's comments there, I mean, I agree. Well, let's say I agree that they're better on paper today than they were at the end of last season. I'm not sure. I'd have to kind of look back if they're better on paper today than they were on paper at the start of last season. I guess, well, I don't know. It's hard to evaluate that, but yeah, I think they got better over the off season, and I'm not as upset about this off season as I was about last one. I think it was a pretty good one. I guess we'll see how it pans out.
Well, I think it had to be a pretty good off season given where this team was, and I also think, you know, the off season, the 2024 off season seemed to be, although it may have started as, but it seemed to be less about who they didn't get and more who they did acquire. Rob, and it seemed to kind of switch kind of gears, like that first couple months, even like 2.5 months. It seemed there was ominous signs on the road ahead.
In regards to your comment, you know, what Schneider said today, better on paper. Yeah, I mean, they're better on paper and they're better than they were last year. I mean, you added a better bat, and your bullpen is stronger. Now, did all the needs get addressed in this offseason? No. Is there still work to be done? Yes, but they are better than they were last year. They're still not great, but they are better on paper, and I think off paper, I guess is what you would say. Like they're a better team.
We were talking a bit about it at work. If you were to be a fly on the wall of our coffee sessions, maybe in early January, I think our opinion of what was happening is much different from maybe a coffee session from yesterday. Do you know what I mean?
You're right. And about focusing on the players we didn't get. And I think that's a great point. And that's what, unfortunately, the media portrayed, is everybody we didn't get and we were trying to get, and not focusing that much on the actual players that we did get, which actually do make the team better, like Schneider said, on paper, and just overall better than they were last year.
And it's the players that they ended up getting, Rob, right? Because
right.
I'm not sure I necessarily agree with the always a bridesmaid, never a bride. Like, they were kind of shooting for the moon every time. And, you know, like the chances of you hitting on one of those is, you know, I think actually the biggest chance that they had was Ohtani last season. I think any of the players that they were going after this year, I maybe Corbin Burns, I think maybe you could say, but I don't know. He seemed to be pretty focused on kind of remaining somewhere Southwest. I think it seemed to change in terms of the offseason and kind of the vibes, as Dustin would say.
I mean, I agree that the perception is much different than the actual reality. I mean, I saw on Twitter somebody was posting that the Blue Jays spent the second most in free agent money this offseason.
That's wild.
Yeah, the second highest team in spending for free agents this offseason. So
who's number one? Is it the Mets or is it the Yankees?
The Yankees.
Okay.
We're up there. We're competing. They're trying hard. They could have been number one if they had signed one of those, Sasaki. Well, maybe not Sasaki because he would have been fairly cheap relative to the cap.
But one of those bigger names like the.
You could say Corbin Burns. Throw that name.
Yeah, if they got Corbin Burns or Alonso, they would have been number one for sure. So yeah, I think a lot of the kind of wringing of hands and the non-Blue Jays fans, commentators, I think sort of focus on that. But I mean, if you really look at it, they assessed where they needed to fill in, and in my opinion, they filled in fairly admirably. Could have been a little bit better. It could always be better, but they got some home run power. They fixed the bullpen pretty effectively, I think, and they just got some more starting pitching depth in Max Scherzer, and I think that they did a pretty good job relative, especially to last season.
Yeah, I agree. Exactly with what you said. I mean, there's still room for improvement, but they addressed, if they needed 5 things, I think they addressed, at least 2 or 3 of them.
Oh, I was going to say, are we say 3.5? Can we say 3.5 things? Because I don't know if I would, like, I feel like I might give them 4, but like they definitely didn't get 5 out of 5, but.
No, I would even say 4 is generous because they still have their, third base problem, and they still have their big, second big bat problem, which they need to address, and potentially your left field problem too.
You just threw a bunch of questions down, Rob, that I think probably are going to get answered in spring training. Like I would hope they would be. At this point, I think after signing Santander, and then there was, kind of a little bit of buzz about Pete Alonso, and it seemed like, after that Steve Cohen presser that maybe the Jays could, nip in here and grab this player, and that would have been, I think that would have been, although this team does seem to kind of go in certain directions and maybe too much in those directions, like they did the whole pitching and defense thing, which didn't kind of backfired and didn't really work. They would have been going all in on home runs, and frankly, I'd be okay with that. If you were to add Pete Alonso, if with Santander, that would be like 80 homers you'd be adding to this lineup. It would be insane.
Yeah.
Now, I don't honestly think that Pete Alonso, there's all this talk about, there's mutual interest. That's seems like a common phrase being thrown around in baseball these days, at least in the off season. I don't think there was as much mutual interest as some people are letting on.
I mean, it's hard to say. I tend to agree with you based on the contract that he ended up signing. I think he had his heart set on New York. He thought that the Mets would pay him based on some offers that they paid him or gave him before that he turned down. And there just wasn't the interest. There wasn't the hot market that they expected for him. One other team, the Blue Jays, was interested, and they made the best offer. And he was just like, well, shit, I don't want to go up there. Or maybe he was more like, I had my heart set on New York. I don't know if he necessarily didn't want to go to Toronto, but it's more like
he wanted to be in New York.
Yeah, he had envisioned the way that his offseason would go, and 3 or 4 teams would make bids, and New York would just come in and give him the best offer, and that didn't happen. So he took what he could, a pillow contract with some opt-outs, and then maybe the market's a little bit more friendly to him next season or the season after.
Well, Dustin, I think it's probably both that, and I just don't think that the number that Toronto probably gave him or offered him was really enough to say, you know what, it's time to pack my bags, right? And there's probably a bunch of different reasons for that. One of which is they currently have a first baseman and are trying to sign him long term. And so there was probably some hesitation in either giving the number or any sort of term that the player would want. And at the end of the day, he seems to like it in New York, and he re-signed for the Mets.
I think you're right. I think he just, like I said, he had his heart set.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, did the Jays actually offer him more than the Mets?
Yeah. Well, I mean, according to reports, I mean, who knows exactly, but according to the reports, they had the best offer.
So he chose to take the lesser offer with the Mets, which is a clear indication that he wanted to be a Met.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a little bit of, I don't know, gamesmanship or whatever that was going on there. They were trying to leverage the Blue Jays to get the Mets to pay, and they called the bluff, and they were probably right to. I mean, I think, in order for the Jays to have signed him, they probably would have had to blow him away, and I probably wouldn't have wanted them to do that, I think.
Yeah, I think they had some sort of a limitation on there, and then it's like, this is the better offer, and if like maybe he wanted more from the Jays, or the Jays were like, yeah, we're not going to give you more, and it's like, okay, well then take the lesser offer and continue to be a New York Met.
The most recent signing, Dustin, I don't think we actually talked about, was Max Scherzer. Did you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I like it. I mean, obviously, it's going to be fun. Like the one thing about this team, I think, is going to be it's much more fun to watch than last year. Not just, I mean, obviously winning is fun, and I think they're going to win more, but they just got, I don't know, Max Scherzer and some others that they've brought on this team, are just fun to watch. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer for sure.
100%.
Yeah, he's a 3-time Cy Young winner, 2-time World Series winner. I think he had one season, he had 2 no-hitters in a single season. That's crazy. Like, he's definitely one of the best pitchers that has ever played the game, and to have him in a Blue Jays uniform, even on the back end of his career, is going to be great. He's a competitor as far as, I've ever seen him. I mean, watching baseball my life, having seen him, he's just like nasty out there, and just, I'm sure as a hitter, intimidating. So yeah, I think it's great to have him on the team. I think it adds, depth to the lineup. It adds, I think we talked a little bit about it. It pushes, what's his name?
Yariel
Rodriguez. It pushes Yariel Rodriguez to the pen, which is going to bolster the bullpen. So yeah, I think it's a great signing. It's, not a crazy amount of money, and not a lot of years or anything. 1 year, and let's see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that as well. It's good signing. But maybe once it's sunk in a little bit, you're kind of like, oh, wait a second. Like when I first heard about the signing, I was like, oh, this is great. And then when you start doing a little bit of research and digging, you're like, hey, wait a second. He wasn't that great last year, and he was injury prone, and he's 41, and you're kind of like, typical for the Jays to sign somebody like that. But at the very least, it's like you said, 1 year, not that much money. But I know as a fan, I'm going to want to watch more games when he pitches, and I'm going to want to go to more games when he's pitching just to see him pitch because of the stature that he has. And you stretch out that starting rotation, and the question mark you kind of had with Yariel Rodriguez, now you say you put him in the bullpen, which even last year I thought he was a better fit in the bullpen anyway. So now you make your bullpen stronger, and you make your starting rotation, well, you hope stronger, and you get fans in the seats. So, I thought it was a good signing, and should be fun to watch him pitch this year.
When Quentin proposed the, do you want to go for the older starting pitcher? And we both kind of said no at the time. He expected when we when he did sign, Quentin expected that we would be somewhat responding negatively to it, and I'm more positive than negative. I generally wouldn't be signing players like that, but it just seems like the risk is very little, and it's little to the point that like if things don't go to plan for the Blue Jays, like he's top of the list to be traded. Like any other team in the league is going to want Max Scherzer, right? So, it's not like you're, if you are having maybe the season that is looking more like 2024 than maybe a prior year, and you want to get under that CBT threshold so you don't get dinged, then he's probably the first one out the door. And there's probably a few players like that this season that will probably be in that position.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, I think when Quentin proposed that, in my mind, it was like, do you want to do that or try and sign Corbin Burns? And it's like, well, I'd rather have Corbin Burns even than Max Scherzer, right? So maybe that's where that came from. I mean, I think I'm good with Max Scherzer. I mean, the injury thing with him, I mean, he's not really that injury prone over his career. He's been fairly consistent.
Workhorse.
Last year, he had 9 games played. He had a back issue. From all reports, he recovered from. He's fine now. He's feeling strong. So I would expect him to make 25 starts. At least that's the goal, right? And I mean, in terms of the trade, I thought he had a no trade clause in his thing, contract, but that might be just like so he can kind of control where he goes. Yeah, he wants to make sure that if he does get traded, he gets sent to a competitive team and not just some dump for a bunch of prospects or something. But I think on the whole, it's a reasonable move. Obviously, it would have been better to have Corbin Burns, but I'm going to be like Rob said. I'm more excited to go to his games than any other. I'd rather watch his games than any other pitcher, except for maybe Gausman.
And I think he wanted to be here, which seems to be rare these days, that he actually wanted to come to Toronto and play in Toronto and for Toronto. So that's always a good sign, and it's always kind of a feel good moment for fans and for me, then to know that this guy wants to be here.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see a bunch of starts from him. I don't think we're going to see I don't know how late he's going to be going into games. So I think his pitches I think are going to be managed, but probably part of the reason that Scherzer joined the Jays was they seem to be able to keep
their pitchers
healthy, and specifically older pitchers healthy, right? So we can whinge and complain about guys getting hooked early and whatever, but their injury record for most pitchers is quite good. Developing younger arms seems to be a bit of an issue, but I would probably surmise that that's happening probably in a lot of teams.
Yeah, we talked about that being kind of a league issue rather than
it's a league issue. One thing on Scherzer too is like he's not really like a velo guy. He's like he
used to be.
He competes. He used to have a really good. But what he's developed over his career are more pitches. His stuff's got better. His commands got better. I was listening to At the Letters. I think it was maybe last week's episode, and I think Adamdz was saying something along the lines of he was quoting a stat that Max Scherzer, like 65% of the time he throws a first strike. It's like he's the best. He's the best in the bigs at that. And so, getting in front of a hitter and putting him on the back foot instead of the pitcher being on the back foot seems to be one of his strengths. And then everybody knows Max Scherzer is just like an absolute strikeout king. So we'll be curious to see, maybe we get the K's going out there in the bleachers, Rob.
Yeah, we can do that.
Well, Kreger's usually the man that brings the K's, so I'll get on the horn with him. All right, gentlemen. I'm just going to do a quick summary of what the Jays did and I guess kind of didn't do. So they non-tendered Romano in November, signed Jimmy Garcia in December. December also had a trade for Andreas Jimenez and Nick Sandlin. They traded away Spencer Horwitz in that one. Of course, they signed Anthony Santander in January. They acquired the mighty Miles Straw in January as well. Signed Jeff Hoffman in January. And then, as we've been talking about the last few minutes, Max Scherzer was signed in February. Nothing further happened. And actually, one thing I want to kind of just touch on before we do give our actual offseason report card. Alex Bregman signed with the Red Sox today.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I was on the phone with Rob this morning, and Dustin, do you think this is the worst, like basically the worst case scenario for a place for him to go?
I mean, it's not good. The Red Sox are going to be that much tougher. Yeah, they're a good team. I mean, that's what it is being in the AL East, I guess, and that's what you're going to get. I mean, it's a arms race for sure.
This offseason is going to be defined about how, do they make the playoffs? Obviously, if they sign Vladdy, but they can't really control what other teams do, and in some ways, it kind of, especially in this division, it might be dictated by the moves the Yankees made and the moves the Red Sox made. But Rob, you wanted to jump in here on this. Go ahead.
I mean, I wasn't a huge fan of getting Bregman here. I would have much rather have taken Pete Alonso. But I think the worst part is that he goes to a team in the AL East and makes them better, which just makes the division that much harder. So where Jays might have been maybe in third place behind New York and Baltimore, now it's like, well, now you're battling for that third spot. Oh, and of course it's whenever the Jays miss out on a big bat like that, because of everything we've seen in the past, was a disappointment. But I was more heartbroken about that than even us not really getting him, because I was like, I don't know how he would have been a fit for the Jays anyway.
Like, if you want to talk about flexing financial muscle, the Red Sox just signed him to a 3-year, $120 million deal.
That's a
now,
wild deal.
It's crazy. So, but now they're playing the deferred money card as well. So there's a lot of deferrals on that.
And he has his opt out every year too.
And he has an opt out every year, which I don't know. I don't know how as Alex Bregman's gonna look in the mirror and opt out of $40 million a year. To be honest, like that's it's insane. Now, as I said, there's a lot of deferrals to it, but I wasn't really an Alex Bregman guy. I do think, we have Ernie Clement at third base, but would Alex Bregman significantly improve that? Yes, and he would be another bat. I think the only way he ended up with the Jays is kind of that, I don't know, pillow deal, Marcus Semien kind of style deal that, the Jays seem to be kind of always open for. And unfortunately, there's another team that decided to plunk down a rather large amount of cash for him. And so he's going to be in the AL East as well. So I think definitely should be an interesting year. And last year did not get off to a good start. I think the Jays are going to have to get off to a really good start this year. They cannot afford to be dragging their heels with, the way that New York has, the way that New York responded to losing Soto. Obviously the Red Sox have made some nice moves, and, I think Baltimore is going to be there just because of their young talent. Here we go, boys. Time to give your grade for the offseason. Dustin, I'm going to start with you.
I think, I've been honestly, I'm teetering towards an A, but I'm probably not going to go there. I think it's a B plus off season. An A, I think would have needed one more bat, and I think it just didn't get to A. But yeah, I'm at a B plus there. I think this is a good off season. I think, like I said earlier, they really shored up the bullpen, which was a major improvement that people aren't really talking about all that much. I mean, I saw that the bullpen as a whole last year had a negative 2.5 WAR on the season. So
negative 2.5. Wow.
Yeah. So even if this bullpen has a 2.5 plus 2.5 WAR, that's 5 wins that they can grab right there. And I think it can be even better than that. So, I mean, they have a lockdown closer in Hoffman, and, you know, Garcia in the 7th and Chad Green in the 8th are I mean, that's as long as they can be healthy, I think we're good. You know, Sandlin in there in the middle with Swanson. I think who else is in there? Brendan Little and Rodriguez as the long man, and I think there's one more. What's his name? Tommy Nance. I think is probably the likely guy there. I think that's a good bullpen, and I think that is really kind of one of the biggest opportunities. And then, yeah, Santander giving us, you know, maybe 30, hopefully 40 home runs. I think that's really going to improve the lineup. I would expect Bo Bichette to be, you know, motivated to have a good year. Being a contract year, I would expect a similar from Vladdy. Even if he does sign, I think he's going to have a good year this year. So, you know, a lot of optimism. And like I said, they kind of filled in where I thought they needed to. So B+ for me.
I think I'm going to go with a B-. I think there was still some work that needed to be done with another bat, and I think the fact that they didn't sign Vladdy in the offseason, I mean, there's still that potential in the next few days, which to me would make that more of a B+. But they didn't. Even the signings again with Max Scherzer. As much as it's a good one for a year, he's still older, and he wasn't great last year. So, you know, I don't know how well he is going to perform this year, and I just think they needed, you know, a stronger bat and to address third base, and left field. So, the Santander one is the one that really puts it over the top. As that's what helps me give them a better grade. I would have gotten them. It would have been less than a B- if they didn't have Santander. So I go B-.
That's a good point, Rob. My B+ is assuming they sign Vladimir. Like in my mind, Vladimir Guerrero they're going to sign that before the deadline here. If they don't, I mean, drop it down to a C. Like seriously.
Yeah. That's. Yeah. I mean, sometimes I'm confident he's going to sign, and then other times like what I read today in Atkins, his press conference with, you know, we're working really hard to try to sign him. I'm like, ugh. And I don't hope Vladdy doesn't kind of play that card that, well, you know what, I want 450, and now that they know that Jays are willing to pay anything, he might be like, well, maybe I want 5. And at that point, are the Jays going to do it, or are they just going to say,
yep,
no more? Now I know this isn't going to be a Vladdy conversation, but that was a big thing that they should have. Well, I would have liked to have seen them to do that, to sign him, and maybe when you sign him, then the other pieces fall into place. Maybe the Bregman or the Alonsos want to come here. So yeah, that's where I'm at. The B-.
Well, we are going to talk about that whole situation next week because the, I guess, self-imposed deadline is fast approaching. It's only a few days away. I'm glad you guys mentioned Vladdy because, you know, you could have put an asterisk there and said, you know, assuming that this happens or this doesn't happen. I'm going to assume he doesn't. I'm going to exclude the signing entirely. Right. So I'm merely judging based on what they needed and what they went out and got. I would have liked to see another bat, and part of my initial frustration and my general frustration, and maybe this is just like a baseball problem again, like we seem to have these like things that we get frustrated about, but they're just like the whole league is frustrated about them. I would have liked to see a little more activity free agent wise earlier in the season, earlier in the off season. And because I think, you know, as much as I'd like to see Juan Soto patrolling right field at the Rogers Center. I just didn't think it was that likely, and it seems like, and again, this is like Dustin. We talk about perception, and I think perception, I actually think is a like a huge word with this team, because there's a lot of perceptions, and sometimes perceptions become reality. But I just don't think they were ever that close. I think that was a battle between New York teams, and I think they got into it. And don't get me wrong, I nothing ventured, nothing gained, but I just would have liked to seen them go after some more realistic targets, right? And I think saying that, and when I say baseball problem, I think it's just like this waiting game, right? And I think it's probably due to the length of the off season. It's probably kind of how the league's structured when you have, a bunch of teams with a lot of money. You have a few teams kind of right behind, and then, you have a bunch of teams that just have zero money at all. And then you kind of have a bunch of teams that are kind of like, if they have a good team, they might spend. If they don't, they won't, right? And it seems like the waiting game kind of is almost like a tactic. And I remember talking to you about this probably back in January, and I think it was somebody had asked, I think it was about Pete Alonso, and is he going to get signed? And this is probably like early January, and the answer was very obviously no, because if he hadn't already been signed by that point, a club coming out, the only way he was going to be signed was a club coming out and giving him some, albatross offer, right? That was the only way it was going to happen. So I think it's a B+ on the face of it. Now, if Jeff Hoffman, gets injured this year after failing 2 physicals and the Jays sign him, that's going to look bad. If Jordan Romano goes and has a good season for the Phillies, they basically done a swap with the Phillies for these 2 players. If Jordan Romano goes and has a good season, it's like, dude, you had this player, you just had to give him his ARB figure, and you didn't have to go find someone else. I think Nick Sandlin's going to be a good pickup. I think a very underrated pickup, because I think we were all keyed in on the Jimenez part of that deal, as well as Horowitz, who, appears to be able to hit, going out the door and bringing back Jimenez.
Who's injured. Yeah.
So there's one positive check in the Blue Jays.
Usually it's the other way around.
Spencer Horowitz needs wrist surgery.
Dodge that bullet. Yeah, he'll be out 6 to 8 weeks.
I kind of thought it was funny in terms of the Santander like kind of banter. And it was like, what if this player doesn't, hit 44 home runs, or what if this? It's like, I don't know. Like, I have to assume that, big league front offices do their homework on all these players, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Santander, like, is he getting better? From what I can see, it looks like he's getting better, right? That doesn't mean he's going to hit 50 home runs next year, but if he hits 35 home runs and bats drives in 100 RBIs, like, it doesn't matter if he doesn't hit 50 home runs. It doesn't matter if he doesn't get his 44 home runs that he got last year, right? There are other things that I think in his game.
Yeah, but it's also protecting Vladdy. So even if he doesn't hit his 40 home runs, it would allow maybe Vladdy to hit a few more home runs. So it kind of balances it out. But it's that protection factor that, that Vladdy needs, because he didn't have it last year and in the prior years when they had Simeon, and who's batting behind him in the cleanup of that year? Because Simeon was batting 1-2. What was that batting order now? Oh, Teoscar. Teoscar was behind him. So that was like the... and Vladdy was better because of that. So, yeah, if he doesn't hit 40 home runs, I'm okay with that, as long as those additional like 5 or 10 home runs come somewhere else.
Yeah, a lot of the projections have him at in the 35 range, so that's where I'm gonna guess he ends up.
Yeah, I'm great. I'm fine with that.
Yeah, that works.
And he's not going to be on the Orioles which because whenever he played against
that's true.
the Jays when he was at Orioles, he was always like a Jays killer, and
he was he was just golfing home runs.
Yeah, so I mean, if he's not there, maybe they
like every time he got to the plate.
Yeah, maybe you pick up a few more wins against the Orioles, which allows you to be better in the division.
I do want to mention, because Rob just mentioned what Ross Atkins said. I think you said that he said we're going to try it. He's not saying that we're going to try. I actually thought that his quote today was actually more like less of a Ross Atkins-ish comment than he normally gives. He said, we have worked extremely hard on keeping Vlad here a long time. That desire is strong and we'll continue to do that. Like, that's not we're going to try. I mean, we're working hard. We're going to keep working hard.
But then they said something after the fact, like he's going to respect. They're going to respect Vlad's
his wishes to have this deadline.
If he doesn't make the deadline, then they're not gonna pursue him after that deadline. To me, I'm kind of like,
no, that's not what he said. No.
Okay.
He said,
what was it?
We're going to be respectful of Vlad and his desire to have the deadline. We understand and respect that, and we'll never close the door. So obviously, if Vlad says that there's a deadline, and they're not gonna bug him about it, but they're not gonna close the door. Like if he wants to come and start having a conversation, then he can.
Okay, yeah. I don't know. I still didn't get a warm fuzzy feeling about it still. So
I did. I felt like from a Ross Atkins, that's like to me like I don't know. If he said something like, we're having conversations and we'll see where we end up and blah blah blah. Like then I'd be like, oh, that's a Ross Atkins answer. But he's saying like we've worked hard to get it. We want to get it done. The desire is strong, and we're going to do it. So I don't know. It feels like
we'll find out in a few days.
I think it's going to happen. I think it's going to happen Monday. I think it's going to be like it's. The thing about deadlines is, you kind of nothing happens until the deadline. Like
it's like studying for that exam, right?
Exactly.
You're gonna write the exam in 3 months. Yeah, you study 3 days before, right? So
couple housekeeping items. Boys, did you know that Rogers Center tours are back?
I didn't know they went away.
I never remember any sort of tours like for the longest time. Like there used to be Skydome tours.
I just never paid attention, so I didn't know.
For $40, you can go on a Rogers Center tour. I kind of almost regretted not going on the Skydome tour when I was maybe younger because I thought it was it was such a cool stadium when the roof and everything. But I think I have gone on a bunch of American ballpark tours, and they're pretty cool. So yeah, I'll probably be doing this at some point this year.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Yeah, I did it. Like I know when I did one of those like Jays Winterfest things, you go there and you can sign up to do certain tours, right? And because of timing and the way you got to book it, you can't see it all. But we did do one where they brought you up to like where the roof opens and the perspective, and I was like, oh, this is kind of cool because you kind of do see the behind the scene of that. So yeah, those tours, and then every time you go into the clubhouse or dugout, which I've seen, those are pretty cool too. So no, I mean it's worth it if you ever have a chance to go and you're a Jays fan. Totally do it.
Definitely. Also, Jose Bautista elected to the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame. So
yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, that's cool.
He's right where he should be. I think he's one of the best Jays players ever. So he's well deserved. So anyway, well, boys, I think that's all the time we have. Thank you very much for joining me.